Welcome to the 2012 Annual Celebration of Philanthropy.
Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. Wow, what an awesome turnout here this evening. Welcome to the 2012 Community Foundation Celebration of Philanthropy. My name is Joe Gebhardt from Loveland, and I've just completed my first year as a member of the Board of Trustees. Thanks to the generosity of all of you and the people of Northern Colorado, the Community Foundation of Northern Colorado is reaching new heights and helping more people than ever before. In Loveland, with the success of a public-private and philanthropic partnership, the Rialto Bridge project has just been completed. Amen. We sincerely hope you'll make it a point to visit this remarkable venue. It truly is awesome. This afternoon, our program is designed to celebrate the importance of philanthropy in Northern Colorado and all the great work done by a multitude of nonprofit organizations that serve our region. Additionally, today, you need to know that there will be a reception with plenty of food and drink following the presentations. Of course, none of this would be possible without the generous support of our sponsors, listed on the slides on the side, with special recognition to our two lead sponsors, First National Bank and the Bruce and Mariel Hawk Fund. Let's give them a round of applause. Also, we need to recognize our other sponsors, the spotlight sponsors, the event sponsors, and our table sponsors. Let's give them a round of applause as well. Now, as we begin our program, it's my pleasure to welcome Lisa Larson, the co-chair of the Regional Development Council. Please say hello to Lisa. Thank you.
As Joe mentioned, I serve as co-chair of the Regional Development Council for the Community Foundation of Northern Colorado. The mission of the Regional Development Council is to identify individuals, families, and businesses that can benefit from the philanthropic services the Community Foundation offers and to communicate with them in a strategic manner. Similar to members of the Regional Development Council, professional advisors in Northern Colorado are ambassadors for philanthropy and for the Community Foundation. Professional advisors include lawyers, accountants, private bankers, trust officers, financial planners, insurance agents, and investment advisors. These individuals have enormous influence on how their clients recognize, perceive, and act on opportunities for charitable giving and philanthropy. As an estate planning attorney who has referred clients to the Community Foundation, I am proud to be part of this group. This evening, we'd like to recognize the key role of professional advisors in charitable giving and philanthropy as a whole. For over 35 years, professional advisors have been connecting their charitably minded clients with the Community Foundation's resources. The confidence they place in the Community Foundation has been central to its success. I'd like to ask all professional advisors who have ever referred a client to the Community Foundation to please stand. The Community Foundation of Northern Colorado would like to say thank you and express its deepest appreciation to you for recommending the Community Foundation to your clients and for trusting the Community Foundation to serve your clients' philanthropic goals. Much of the success of the Community Foundation is attributable to you. Thank you. The Community Foundation is connected to Northern Colorado in more ways than you might think. We would like to share with all of you a brief video highlighting those connections. Let's now watch the report to the community.
Hello, and welcome to our annual celebration of philanthropy. I'm Bruce Hawk.
And I'm Connie Doan. Bruce and I are both proud to be board members of the Community Foundation of Northern Colorado.
Since 1975, the foundation has been working to build a more engaged, visionary, and philanthropic community.
We serve Northern Colorado by managing a group of charitable funds. Donations to the funds are tax deductible, and grants from the funds are distributed to nonprofits, schools, and churches. Donors can quickly and easily establish their own fund to support causes they care about. Additionally, community foundations serve a unique leadership role by bringing people, ideas, and resources together around important local issues. No other organization in Northern Colorado has such a dynamic network of relationships with donors, nonprofits, and community leaders. Many of our grants impact the quality of life we all enjoy here in Northern Colorado.
So let's take a look at some of the projects that have been supportive of the foundation in the last few years.
So 3 years ago, we were driving around Northern Colorado, and many of the projects that were just getting underway back then are now completed. One of the projects that 3 years ago was just getting off the ground was the Discovery Museum. It was a barren piece of land at the corner of Cherry and College, and today there's a beautiful new building on that property. Let's go take a look. Well, all right, we're up here on the observation deck of the Fort Collins Discovery Museum. We're right outside the Markley Community Room, which we helped to finance through a variety of grants from a variety of different funds at the Community Foundation. It's a great vantage point to think about the work that we're doing in regard to regionalism and sustainability. You know, there's just so many different organizations that the Community Foundation is connected to in one way or the other. Here's another example in Fort Collins. Centennial High School is an organization that we're providing some scholarship support for through a fund that was established by the Breakfast Rotary Club. Here we are at Veterans Plaza out at Spring Canyon Park in Fort Collins. Only in the last few months have we finally been able to put together all of the funding for Veterans Plaza, which is just a phenomenal venue for education and events related to veterans issues, located in this gorgeous Spring Canyon Park right here on the edge of the foothills in West Fort Collins. Okay guys, let's head down to Loveland and see what's going on down there. About a year or so ago, we had the opportunity to work with the City of Loveland and a private developer to do a project that would enhance the historic Rialto Theater called Rialto Bridge. It gives the City of Loveland a tremendous amount of public space right here in the heart of downtown, and it all ties in with what our Loveland Community Fund Committee decided to do many years ago, which was to work toward the development of downtown to enhance downtown from an economic development and cultural standpoint. Okay, this is the historic feed and grain building here in Loveland, and there's some really interesting plans in the works for what can be done with this in terms of providing some art studios, housing for artists, that type of thing, and we're working with a lot of other folks in Loveland to hopefully make that a reality in the next few years. Okay, we're heading into Berthoud, and we've been involved in a lot of projects in Berthoud, ranging from the artwork on the water tower to the McCarty Fickle home. Well, all right, we're heading up the Big Thompson Canyon on our way to Estes Park, and you know, we have a great group of volunteers in Estes, our Estes Valley Community Fund Committee, and right now that group is working to raise some additional dollars to go into the community fund that would help us to be able to make more grants to a variety of nonprofit organizations in the Estes Valley. We also have a really great community garden called Mrs. Walsh's Garden, which is just right outside downtown in Estes, and then we're also exploring the possibility of a community center for Estes Park, and we're working with a variety of community leaders to explore that possibility, and are looking at housing it in a former elementary school building. So two organizations that we're working with right now in the area of regionalism and sustainability are the Colorado Conservation Exchange and Embrace Northern Colorado. Colorado Conservation Exchange is a brand new startup endeavor that involves folks from CSU, from the Nature Conservancy, the Forest Service, and many other organizations. And our role is to serve as the fiscal agent and to just provide some leadership to help this new endeavor get off the ground. It's a revolutionary approach to conservation that involves landowners and those who benefit from greater land use practices. The other organization that we're working with is Embrace Northern Colorado, which is an organization that is looking at land use in Northern Colorado and planning for the future. You know, we all love this landscape, and we love the quality of life that Northern Colorado has to offer. And at the Community Foundation, we really want to be an organization that's looking forward and looking well into the future, and helping organizations like the Colorado Conservation Exchange and like Embrace Northern Colorado to preserve the quality of life that we all appreciate so much. And we want this same quality of life for our kids and our grandkids in the future. Well, okay, hopefully this gives you a sense of why it's so important for us to celebrate philanthropy in Northern Colorado. There's so many great projects that are going on, so many great organizations that make a huge difference in our quality of life. And at the Community Foundation, we're involved in so many different projects in big ways and small ways, and we couldn't do any of it without the donors and the community leaders that we work with to make it all happen. So thanks for being a part of all the things we're involved in that build a better community for Northern Colorado.
It's amazing the impact that our donors have contributed to the region.
Yes, it is, Bruce. During calendar year 2011, we received $10 million in gifts, including the gift of a small manufacturing firm worth several $million. During the same time frame, the foundation distributed $4.3 million to charitable organizations and projects. Currently, the foundation manages over 330 funds, most of which are permanent funds, meaning donors' wishes are carried out forever.
In behalf of all of us, thank you so much for coming this evening.
We appreciate your support.
Well, you know, this is my 10th year of being a part of this annual event, and you know, I think we have more to celebrate this year than perhaps ever before. Wynn Odell is going to be joining us here in just a minute to make a very special announcement. and I know we're all excited to hear what that's going to be about. But before that, I'd like to take just a minute to recognize a few folks that are with us today. First of all, the video that you just saw has more than a dozen nonprofit organizations and projects that were mentioned in that video. The Museum of Discovery, the Centennial High School, the Rialto Project, Colorado Conservation Exchange, and on and on. I'd like to just ask all of the board members and staff members and people that are involved with those many projects that were mentioned in the video, just stand for a minute so we can just look around and see who's involved in all these different things. Thank you for your volunteer efforts. And you know, our focus at the Community Foundation is on building permanent resources for the community. And we're really honored that we get to work with 35 nonprofit organizations in this community that have placed their endowment fund, that have entrusted their endowment fund with the Community Foundation, and we work with them to grow those funds for the future. This is a list of those 35 organizations, and that has grown tremendously in just the last few years. It now, these types of funds, these agency endowment funds, now represent about 22% of our total assets. So I'd just like to ask all the board members and staff members associated with these nonprofit organizations to please stand and be recognized. Wow. You know, I also want to recognize one organization today that we want to single out for just a minute. They are celebrating their 40th anniversary in this community, and that is Foothills Gateway. And Tim O'Neill, and where are the folks from Foothills? Here we are. Okay, Tim, and everybody, y'all all stand up. I hope you're familiar with Foothills Gateway. It's one of our great nonprofit organizations located right on the border. I think I heard the story that you wanted to get it right on that Fort Collins-Loveland border, and it serves the entire region and does tremendous work for people with disabilities. So Tim, thanks to you and your gang for all you do. We really appreciate it. One other individual that I wanted to single out today for her long tenure as a nonprofit executive in this community, who is now retiring, is Candace Mayo. Candace, where's Candace? Candace is, there she is, there we go. Candace is retiring after 12 years as executive director with Habitat for Humanity. I believe she told me something along the neighborhood. I'll probably get this wrong, but I think it was 37 homes. Is that about right, Candace? We've got some flowers and a gift certificate for Candace. Thank you. 12 years. Great job. You've made a big impact on this community, and we just wanted to thank you for that and celebrate your service. And finally, I wanted to recognize one of the new funds that was created at the Community Foundation this year. You know, we're always excited. Our staff just loves to meet with new folks that come in the office and get a new fund established, no matter how small, no matter how big, no matter no matter what type of fund it might be. But I wanted to just point out one of the funds that we created this past year because I thought it would be of special interest to you. Hap and Sue Enander created an estate plan that left their business, a small manufacturing firm that employs about 35 people, It's been valued at several $1 million. They left in their estate plans that business to a charitable trust. The trustees had numerous options available to them to utilize the company as an asset to carry out the philanthropic wishes of Hap and Sue Enander. They looked at all the different options, private foundations, and they decided to work with the Community Foundation of Northern Colorado. And we're just really honored that they chose to work with us. This is certainly one of the largest gifts that we've ever received, one of the most complicated gifts we've ever received. And we have a wonderful board of directors that we've appointed. Our board of trustees has appointed a board of directors to oversee the company. And the folks, Paul Harder, who's CEO of Aquahot, and a good group from Aquahot is here today. And I just wanted you guys to stand up, if you would, and be recognized. A lot of other things I could mention. I just really quickly wanted to mention that we had 2 private foundation conversions this year. The Sutherland Foundation, Tom and Jean and Kid and the whole crew. Where are you guys, Tom and Jean? Here we are, Kit over here. Scott Kentz, and we've had a great relationship with them through the years, and they've decided to fold their private foundation into a donor-advised fund at the Community Foundation. Another private foundation conversion is Chauncey and Christy Taylor, the owners of Johnson's Corner. If you don't, some of you from Loveland may know Chauncey, who's recently, I believe, recently elected to the city council. They also folded a private foundation into a donor-advised fund. Lots of great things happening. So thank you. Thanks to all of you. And I know if you're like me, you are just dying to hear what Wynn Odell has to say. So Wynn, don't keep us in suspense any longer. And by the way, for those of you who don't know Wynn is our former board chair at the Community Foundation and a great community leader. So come on up, Wynn.
Thank you, Ray. I am thoroughly honored to be the one chosen to make this special announcement tonight. And I am going to drag you through 2 numbers-oriented slides. They are relevant to what the announcement is going to be, but we'll look at them first to sort of set the stage. We ended calendar year 2011 with $51 million in assets, which was quite a milestone for us. It puts us above our goal of reaching $50 million in assets, a goal that we set in 2003 with the launch of the Cornerstone campaign. The achievement of this $50 million asset base ensures the future sustainability of the Community Foundation. And now our second slide is even more dramatic, because between December 2011 and March 31st, 2012, we received another, I should be able to do this, $11.1 million in assets for the Community Foundation. And that's why I'm up here today, is to announce the largest gift in the history of the Community Foundation of Northern Colorado, $8 million. We're very excited. We believe that this gift not only is the largest gift that the Community Foundation has ever received, but outside of gifts to CSU, we believe that this is certainly one of the largest gifts that's been received in our community ever, which makes it even more special. And now I have the pleasure of reading a letter from our anonymous donor to you. Have you had a special person in your life that always gave you the perfect but unexpected birthday gift, or provided opportunities and experiences that encouraged you to explore and see the world in new ways? In our family, that was Uncle Charles. Because of Uncle Charles, we have the opportunity to create a donor-advised fund with the Community Foundation of Northern Colorado. Uncle Charles has made an unexpected gift to not only our family, but to the whole community. We think that's exciting. We had a number of choices as to where we could establish the Uncle Charles Fund. We chose the Community Foundation of Northern Colorado for a number of reasons. Most importantly, the foundation offers us an array of donor services, including online grant making, an investment policy that fits with our long-term goals, a fee structure competitive with any community foundation in the country, a small but experienced and dedicated staff to work with, and the knowledge that the Community Foundation is community-based and governed by committed local volunteers. Additionally, we know full well private foundations are not as private as you might think and are subject to regulations that donor-advised funds are not. A donor-advised fund is less expensive to administer than a private foundation, and it relieves donors of many of the hassles of reporting. The Community Foundation will be our front office, back office, advisor, fund manager, and friend. Also important to us is that the foundation allows us to remain anonymous. We're grateful to have this option available to us. We look forward to engaging our children along with us as donor advisors. This will allow us to explore our individual and collective philanthropic interests and to further encourage and promote philanthropy as a family and a community value. Charitable giving is about making choices, and those choices are based in personal values. We recognize that our passions might be different than yours. However, we believe that we all share an interest in building a strong and vibrant community. The Uncle Charles Fund will invest in communities and community benefit organizations to enhance the quality and circumstances of life for present and future generations. All grants will be donor-initiated. We are fortunate to live in a giving community, a community that encourages philanthropy. This community value is apparent as we look around at the people in the room today. We live among many who give time, talent, as well as treasure. And just as Uncle Charles has done in our family, we hope that this unexpected gift will benefit our community for generations to come. Upon the deaths of all the current advisors, our intent is that the Uncle Charles Fund will become a fully endowed, unrestricted fund of the Community Foundation, administered by a committee of current and past Community Foundation board members. We hope it lives and gives beyond our imaginations. We know that not everyone has an Uncle Charles. However, in some small way, through this fund, now our community does have an Uncle Charles. We hope you'll we hope you'll join us in celebrating this gift. And with that, I'd like to propose a toast, although I didn't bring my water glass up here, to our generous donor, their wonderful gift. Hey, all right, a toast. And the continued growth and health of the Community Foundation. Cheers. And now we'll move on to a short video celebrating the philanthropic leadership of Sister Mary Alice Murphy.
I met Sister Mary Alice about 20 years ago, and I think during that time she's been a constant and persistent drumbeat of a voice for articulating for our community the needs and challenges of the poor. And I think that in doing so, she's raised the consciousness of many in our community who don't daily interact with that segment of our city.
The thing is, if you can get caring people, and I have found Fort Collins to have a lot of caring people and skilled people. So I keep saying there's no reason we can't do it. Our problems aren't that massive that we can't address them locally and do something about it. So, and that's where I had to go out and find people with talents that I didn't have.
She's tremendously effective, and I think that's really because she is generally the voice for those that have no voice. She speaks up for people who are really incapable of speaking for themselves.
She has great strength in a very gentle way, and she has demonstrated her ability to get people to commit to her, commit their time, commit their energy, commit their money.
Then I guess I must attract people that want to get things done too, so that's what we've done. We just go ahead and get to work, roll up your sleeves and start to do something.
Very hard to say no to Sister when she starts talking about homeless children, homeless women, homeless families, homeless men.
And she constantly reminds us that every single individual deserves dignity. And you can't just lump people together. You can't say the homeless or the chronically homeless without thinking specifically about the needs of individuals.
Well, I think she's been a remarkable force in our community, really the conscience of our community.
I wish I could have done more, but I think my focus would have been where it is.
I think her legacy is creating the social infrastructure in our community that enables people from various economic situations, educational situations, no matter what their differences are, that we're all connected here.
And I think I'm probably proudest of the people who've picked up the challenge and are continuing on the work, because you don't want to build something that falls apart because you leave.
And I think her presence in this community has helped us become a more caring community in a wide variety of ways. And you can't quantify that, and that's an intangible, but we are more caring because of Sister Mary Alice Murphy.
I've been fortunate, and I've, you know, my faith life is very important to me. So I believe if you're out trying to do something like that, God's going to help you. And that's been my belief. And people tease me about that, but it has worked.
Good evening. My name is Bryce Hawk, and I am the Executive Director of Homeward 2020, which is the Fort Collins community multi-sector effort toward ending homelessness. And I would just like to say a few words in introduction for Sister Mary Alice Murphy, who obviously has done a tremendous amount in our community and has really been a social entrepreneur, as well as a pioneer for those who are truly in need in our community, and has been doing so for the last 30 years. As has been stated there in the video, she has played a very critical role in the founding of such things as Catholic Charities of Northern Colorado, the Homeless Day Services Initiative, the St. Joseph Peace and Justice Ministry, Mary's Closet, Care Housing, Dedicated Navigators, the Hand Up Cooperative, the Homelessness Prevention Initiative, Homeward 2020, just to name but a few. Needless to say, she's one who's had incredible impact on so many different people and on so many different fronts, time and time again. In fact, some of the great nicknames that I've heard for Sister Mary Alice Murphy are the iconic figure for those in need in Fort Collins, or the true force of nature. I think those who have had the opportunity to have worked with Sister Mary Alice Murphy truly feel sainted by the experience. Sometimes I feel that way just when I get the opportunity to hang out with her dog Molly, just by sheer proximity. But I think that there was Jim Collins, who is a world-renowned business researcher, writer, lecturer, who's wrote New York Times bestsellers such as Built to Last and Good to Great, said that the absolute best CEOs and organizational leaders would call a level 5 leader is someone who doesn't just greatly advance an organization during the span of their careers, but when they're ready to move on or they're ready to retire, they have selflessly laid out a foundation for its continued growth and for its continued good work on into the future. And that is something that Sister Mary Alice has done time and again and again and again. So you please join me in welcoming Sister Mary Alice Murphy.
All that praise makes me think of another sister, Joan Chittister. And when she gets an introduction like that, she says, "Don't you wish your mother was here?" She'd believe it. And that's all I could think of with all the lovely things that were said. My dad, too. I'd want him to be here as well. This is a great community. That's why good things can get done. When I saw the title of tonight's gathering, Celebration of Philanthropy, I said to myself, that's got a nice ring to it. And then I thought, I'm going to look up the word philanthropy. So I did, and Wikipedia, or however you pronounce that word, and it said, lover of humanity. Isn't that nice? And I think that's what we have in this room, are a lot of people who are lovers of humanity. And that's why people like myself can get things done. This is a great community to work in. And so I want to thank all the lovers of humanity that are in this room, especially those folks that said such nice things about me. I truly appreciate that. Whether I'm not so sure I deserve it, but I appreciate their kind thoughts. Raising funds for charity is not an easy thing to do. And I'm reminded of a story that I read about Andrew Carnegie. The secretary of his foundation came over to his home, and after he had notified him, I'm sure otherwise, was asking for a check for $60,000. And those of you who are mathematicians can figure out today that would be a whole lot more money. Anyway, as the philanthropist sat down to write the check, he stopped midstream and he said, you know, there's other people besides me that believe in this good cause. So he said to the secretary, I want you to go out and raise 30 and then I'll match it. Well, much to his surprise, the next day, the secretary was back, and he said he'd raised the money. So he sat down, he wrote out the check as he promised, and he handed it to him, and he said, I'm curious, who gave you the rest of the money? Do you mind telling me? And the man said, oh, no, not at all, your wife. Many of the directors of agencies here in town wish we could raise that much money in that amount of time with that kind of a sequence. But at any rate, it shows that people are willing, if they feel a cause is worthwhile, they're willing to do what they can to help. I'd like to leave you with a main thought. A few of us can sit down and write a great big check for the charity we believe in. Uncle Charlie excluded, but very few of us can do that. However, what I'd like you to think about is that every one of us can give something. We can give some money, we can give some talent, we can give some resources, some time, and if each of us gives, then this is going to be a much better community. And I have to beat my drum that I hope that some of the money goes to the poorest among us. For those who do not have shelter, who do not have food, who have few clothes to wear, who have not had much education. These are the people that need the help the most, and I hope that we remember them. One of the things I've learned from working with the poor is that you need to share the little you have, or you'll lose the good person you could become. Thank you very much.
One quick announcement with you.
I've got enough surprises for tonight.
And in honor of Sister Mary Alice Murphy, the Community Foundation, through their Fort Collins Community Fund, is making 3 generous gifts to our community's most vulnerable citizens, to Catholic Charities, Neighbor to Neighbor, and to the Homelessness Prevention Initiative.
Wonderful. Thanks. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I will make this a very brief introduction. It is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker today, Salim Ismail. Salim, his current title is Global Ambassador for Singularity University, which is based in Silicon Valley at NASA Ames. He travels the world and meets with brilliant people, and is, I think I can safely say, one of the most intriguing speakers I've ever heard. I heard Salim speak at a conference, a gathering of Community Foundation people from around the country. And you know, you go to those conferences and you hear a lot of speakers, and sometimes you're looking at your watch, other times you aren't. With Salim, I was absolutely dumbfounded by many of the things he shared, his extraordinary perspective that he has, and I think you will be as well. And how we address issues, how we address concerns, even here in our local community, I think is something that Salim can shed some light on and help us to think in a more creative way. So Salim, if you would come on up. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and hopefully the folks in the back can hear me okay. I couldn't hear you if you yelled out, so this is a rather large room. I was told this was a fairly small town. This is quite a gathering. I feel like I want to move here just so I can donate. So there's a wonderful feeling here. How many of you, just as if I can have a show of hands, how many of you have heard of Singularity University at all? Okay, so a few of you. Let me just see one more show of hands. How many of you have seen this photograph or this image before? Okay, so in this image, there's a dog, right? And it's a kind of a Dalmatian image in there. Does everybody see that? Does anybody not see the dog? So let me make it easier for you. There's the dog, right? Now does everybody see the dog? Okay. Now, what I've just done is, without your permission, I've actually rewired your brains. For the rest of your life, when you see this image, you'll actually see the dog. In fact, you can't not see the dog. And from a neuroscience perspective, we actually have no idea how this happens. We have no idea how the brain affects a one-way permanent learning that cannot be reversed. So I did that without your permission. With your permission, I'd like to take the next little while and rewire your brains from a technology perspective. And I'd like you to come out of this talk never seeing technology the same way again. All right? So this is a graph of human population over the last several thousand years. And you can see the very dramatic acceleration over the last few hundred years as we've taken over and exploded across the planet. And we talk about sustainability. This is a major issue. If this graph continues as planned and we peak out at 9 or 10 billion, at the consumption levels of a US citizen, we will need 6 planetfuls of Earth resources to use it all, to service all of that. So we have some pretty interesting structural issues coming along. However, we have this perception that the world is in a very bad place. And it happens because we read the news. We have an amygdala in our brains that's genetically created and evolutionarily created to watch out for danger. If you hear a rustle in the bushes and you thought it was your friend and it was actually a tiger, your genes did not progress, right? So we've evolved this ability, and we are always on the alert for bad news, which is why bad news sells. But actually, the world is actually in a much better place than we've ever seen before. If you look at UN statistics, extreme poverty is down 75% just in the last 30 years. You don't read that in the news. Just in terms of here's the last century, and look at the extraordinary progress that we've seen just in the last 100 years, right? As a more dramatic example, a phone call across the country 100 years ago cost almost a day's worth of wages. and that's essentially free today. So we're actually seeing very dramatic progress. We just don't hear about it as much. Now, what this is driven by, fundamentally, especially over the last few decades, is the speed and rise of computing. If you look at that graph, in 2001, 10 years ago, my $1,000 laptop had the equivalent computing power in it of the brain of an insect. That's how much computing power is in that laptop. Today, we're at the equivalent computing power of the brain of a mouse. In 10 years, we'll have the equivalent computing power of a human brain in that laptop. And in 30 or 35 years, we'll have the equivalent computing power of 8 billion human brains. And the question is, what would we do with it? We have this sense that technology is actually very hard to predict. We don't know where it's going. But actually, we know exactly how many chip cycles and how fast this device will be in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. What we lack is the imagination as to what we would do with it. And fundamentally, that's some of the things we think about. One more show of hands. How many of you have heard of 3D printing? Okay, quite a reasonable number. All right, so this is the ability to actually fabricate. This is called digital fabrication. Let me show you a video of what this looks like. So this is a plastic substance, and it's like an inkjet printer. Instead of spraying out ink, it's heating up this plastic, and it forms an object in 3 dimensions. This is a whistle. And it's like a Lego-type substance, a hard plastic substance you can do. And you can create all sorts of objects with this. To give you another example, this is I scan an object, I print it out, and I create a spanner. So layer by layer, it's layering down 1/100th of an inch at a time of this hard substance, and I can create a tool. If you look at that particular thing very closely, you can actually mold that. It's an interesting thing. So this is 3D printing. Now, these printers used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. They used to be used by architects and designers to make very complex objects. They've been dropping in price to tens of thousands of dollars. That's a $2,000 printer. And that printer will fabricate 70% of the parts to make the next printer. Right? Now this here at the top middle there is a nested, 7 nested spherical balls. You can actually mold that. On the top right, you actually have a woman's shoe. So if you break a heel, you just print a new one. Okay? I'm very happy to hear that. My wife buys a lot of shoes. On the bottom right, you can see these videos on YouTube if you want, but they've actually gotten to the point where you can 3D print 1 layer at a time, a bicycle, and then they've gotten on the bicycle and ridden away. Right? So we are set to see quite an explosion of this. The cheapest one of these printers is now about $700. So in about 3 to 5 to 7 years, we'll have these in our homes. So if you break a little plastic gadget, you just scan it and print a new one. At the bottom middle there, that funky Mobius strip thing is actually titanium. We're actually at the ability where we can actually 3D print and fabricate metal. And that has an enormously interesting consequence for manufacturing of all types. And at the bottom left, what you have there is food. Now you can spray food into place, and now we're into full Star Trek replicator territory. Okay? And this is here today. This is not science fiction. We study, at Singularity University, we study these fast-moving technologies. As Ray mentioned, we're hosted at NASA Ames. Of the 10 NASA centers around the country, we do all of the R&D and supercomputing for all of NASA. We're a nonprofit funded by these organizations, Google, Cisco, Nokia, Autodesk. Our 2 main founders are Ray Kurzweil, who thinks a lot about accelerating technologies, has done some extraordinary work in his life. He invented the Kurzweil synthesizer from which digital music has sprung, and a number of other technologies. And Ray started trying to time his inventions to the marketplace. And so he started studying Moore's law. Gordon Moore, the head of Intel in the 60s, made this prediction that the price performance of computing would double every 18 months. And people said, well, that's crazy, you can't keep that up. But incredibly, 60 years into it, like clockwork, every 18 months, the price performance of your laptop doubles, right? And he went back and tracked it all back, and if you look at that graph, you'll see that he's tracked it back to 1900. And Ray was surprised to see that the price performance of computing has actually been doubling on a logarithmic scale all the way back 100 years through vacuum tubes, relays, integrated circuits, etc. And the question he asked himself when he saw this curve was, why is that curve so smooth? We have wars, we have recessions, we have ups and downs in the semiconductor industry, yet that is an incredibly predictable path. And he looked at this for a couple of decades. He was very puzzled by this. And he finally came up with this fundamental observation that once you take any domain or discipline and you power it with information properties and ground it in information science, that it goes into an exponential growth path, and then you can't shake it off that path. So for example, now that we've sequenced the human genome, medicine is on that path, and we've seen the price of gene sequencing drop at a more than exponential rate over the last 10 years. And we're seeing this happen in a number of domains, and Ray identified a lot of these technologies that are subject now to this law of accelerating returns. Peter Diamandis, our other co-founder and the main driver of Singularity University, just wrote a best-selling book called Abundance, where he shows that technology used in the right way can give us abundance in a number of areas. A good example is photography. When we went from the transition from film photography to digital photography, we suddenly have an abundance of photographs, right? Maybe too many. And so he's written a book showing actually with technology, we may soon be able to have clean water, education, healthcare, et cetera. We may be able to solve some of our grand challenges with technology, and he shows the path by how you get there. So those are our two main co-founders. 3.5 years ago, we had a founding conference at Singularity University at NASA, brought together 50 or 60 thought leaders. At the top right, in the right blue, is Chris Anderson from Wired magazine. Ray is in the glasses in the middle. I'm behind him. Behind me is Larry Page from Google. George Smoot is a couple over from Ray, who's a Nobel Prize winner in physics. Interesting group, and the question was asked, is it worth creating an educational institution focused only on accelerating technologies? I got there, I was the head of innovation at Yahoo before this, and the NASA folks who I'd set up a relationship with while at Yahoo came along and asked me to join. The key observation that came out of this that got me very excited was the observation that if you look at some of our global challenges, the spread of a pandemic, or aspects of climate change, or the financial crisis, some of our global challenges are actually rooted in accelerating factors and exponential factors. The financial crisis, completely driven by the underlying acceleration in the derivatives and other instruments, and our leadership around the world, business or political, does not understand this phenomenon. And frankly, humanity, we don't think of the world this way. We are geared biologically to think linearly and locally. You know, if I see a bird in the sky, I can extrapolate pretty easily where it will be. And as an example, if I take 30 steps linearly, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., I'll get to the back of the room. And it's kind of easy to imagine, where am I 1/3 of the way, where am I 2/3 of the way in that progression? You can make that quite accurate analysis in your head. If I take 30 steps exponentially, and I double it every step, at step 2, 4, 8, 16, etc., at step 30, I'm at 1 billion, which is very different than 30. I'm 26 times around the world. And it's hard to imagine, where am I 1/3 of the way, where am I 2/3 of the way in that progression? And in a world that is being increasingly disrupted by these phenomena, and more domains are being information enabled, we need a new generation of leadership that can manage through this kind of disruption and can understand how to project where we're going. And that's essentially our mission statement, is to find the next generation of leadership and teach them how to think about the world this way. And we focus on the biggest problems in the world: clean water, home energy, education, poverty, healthcare, etc. Because these technologies are all scaling, they're all doubling very rapidly, and they can scale to a global level. We also operate on the thesis that technology is a major driver of progress in the world, and has been for many thousands of years. And if we don't address some of our global challenges with technology, then we often end up in war. I think there are 70 armed conflicts around the world today fighting over clean water because we don't have the adequate technology to desalinate it and so on. Right? And war, I think we can all agree, is a pretty expensive way of progressing humanity. So we aim to find this next generation of leaders and teach them how to think about this. We run a series of programs, the heart of which is a 10-week summer program for 80 of the top graduate students from around the world. And we study these disciplines. The top 5, the ones on the top left there, AI and robotics, nanotech and 3D printing, biotech, bioinformatics, medicine, neuroscience, all powered by this extraordinary growth in computing, are the core technologies. They're all doubling in their price performance anywhere from between 18 to 30 months. Right? And they're all scaling very rapidly. We think about the bottom left ones, ethics, design, entrepreneurship, et cetera, is how would you manage these technologies? How do you get them out into the world? How do you fund a new idea, and so on? And we think of energy and space as application areas where you might do and ecological systems and so on. Where might you deploy these technologies? Now, the big challenge we had was how do you take 12 very broad subject areas and squeeze them into 10 weeks and deliver any value? That was the big risk that we took on, was a curricular challenge. We have as speakers some of the top thinkers in the world that come and speak. Craig Venter, who sequenced the first human genome, Vint Cerf, who invented the internet, Will Wright, who invented Spore and SimCity, Justin Ratner, the CTO of Intel. In each of those disciplines, we have a track chair who orchestrates the curriculum. At the top left, there's Dan Berry, who's our head of faculty, is a 3-time space shuttle astronaut and an MD, PhD. But his real expertise seems to be in robotics. He's one of those rather annoying people that knows everything about everything. We bring together 80 students. They come from up to 35 or 40 countries every summer. They come and live with us at NASA. We look for students that are at the top of their class academically. They've shown deep expertise and rigor in one area at least. Average age is about 30. They've done something entrepreneurial or leadership-oriented, and they're committed and interested in solving big problems. That's our kind of sweet spot student. When they come in, the first week, we give them a deep understanding of what are the characteristics of clean water, climate change. We bring in the Gates Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, the World Bank, USAID. What's been tried? What's failed? What do the experts say? What solution vectors look interesting? They then get a very intensive set of lectures. For about half the summer, they get about 300 hours of lectures from 160 different speakers on what is the future of each of these fields. What's in the labs today? What's being commercialized tomorrow? What products and services might result? Who are the top thinkers in each of these places? How are these technologies converging? For example, I showed you 3D printing. Stem cell researchers are using that 3D printer that I showed you, and they're spraying layers of cells one on top of each other, and we're on the verge of fabricating human organs. Right? Think about that one development will completely change medicine. Has enormous ethical, legal issues. How would you regulate that? What if somebody hacks it? Right? So there's some big issues coming down the pike. At the middle of the summer, we find this group of students tends to be the smartest set of people in the world on where these technologies are going, because they have the state-of-the-art view and they have the breadth across all these technologies. The second half of the summer, they work on a project. We turn into an incubator. They form teams clustered around clean water or poverty or one of the grand challenges. And their objective is come up with a product or service that would impact 1 billion people within 10 years. We're in Silicon Valley. You have 3 weeks, off you go, report back. Right? At the end of the summer, we launched these as NGOs or research initiatives or for-profit companies. A couple of examples. This team looked at the rise of 3D printing and control systems and robotics that are moving very, very quickly. And they looked at construction and noticed the way that we build houses today fundamentally has not changed in, 5,000 years. And so they designed this giant, at the bottom left there, a giant crane-shaped thing, looks like a car wash. It will fabricate a 2-bedroom house in a day and a half. And the picture there is it laying down ribbons of concrete with a weaving pattern to give it strength. And they're at the point where they can do a 10-meter load-bearing wall, and they're expanding that to do a whole house. Obviously very useful in Haiti after an earthquake or Tokyo, et cetera, if you can just stamp out housing. Right? This team from last summer was looking at poverty, and they noticed that most of the roads get washed out, and there's no physical movement of goods and services. Well, how do you alleviate poverty if you can't move anything around? In the middle of the summer, Chris Anderson from Wired magazine came and did a talk on drones. You've seen these toy helicopter, quadcopter things that are all the rage right now. And he's open sourcing all of the software around this and creating a whole DIY community around these drones. And the students looked at this and they said, in telephony, Africa skipped over the entire wireline generation and went straight to wireless. They'll never really have the money to put roads in, but you could use this as a transportation system because these things today can carry a 5-pound package about 15 or 16 miles. And so they designed what they called a Matternet, kind of an internet IP address system, a next generation Pony Express, if you will, for medicine and food. So a package would get picked up, flown a few kilometers, dropped off, the drone would recharge itself, the next one would pick it up, take it over a river or a mountain, and so on. This is the kind of breakthrough type of idea we look for. Now, whether it works or not, this will inspire a whole new set of people to think about how do you think about the future of transportation. What's interesting about these drones is they can today do a 2-kilo package 10 kilometers. They're doubling in their capability every 10 months. So if you layer a solution on it, it will scale. Right? So that's the kind of crazy thing. We've done about 25 of these over our 3.5-year history. This is a photograph from our curriculum planning meeting. We actually bring all our faculty together. Because we're dealing with the fastest moving technologies, we actually revisit our curriculum every time we do a program. So several times a year, we bring our whole faculty together and we revisit every lecture because we have to. And so there's an interesting process that we've had to develop along that. We also do a 1-week executive program for the existing leadership in the world, CEOs, investors, government leaders. And we focus on these core technologies. It's a 1-week-long program. We do a half a day on each of these. So it's a half day on nanotech. It's an hour on what is it and what's the state of the art. A second hour on what breakthroughs do we expect to see in the next 3, 5, 10 years. And 2 hours on what are the implications of those breakthroughs. What products and services might result, what industries might be impacted. The general thesis here is that we're seeing an acceleration in the actual metabolism of the economy. Right? It used to take 20 years to create $1 billion opportunity. We're seeing that happen today in months. And if you're the CEO of a big company and you do not know what technologies may disrupt you, you're simply not doing your job. You end up as Kodak or RIM or Nokia. I actually went to the University of Waterloo where RIM is based, and I've seen the emails internally. When the iPhone was first announced, the engineers sent emails to the CEO saying, this is a fraud, it's a fake. You can't have this battery life, screen resolution, and format in one package. Poor CEO is totally blindsided when it turns out to be real, could cost them the company. And so we teach people what are the breakthroughs that come across all of these. The second half of the week, they work on their own industry, their product, their vertical, and think about how might these 30 or 40 major breakthroughs impact their world, and how do you take advantage of that. Right? So we focus on very fast-moving technologies. We think these technologies can deliver extraordinary outcomes. We know they're hugely disruptive. We're very future-looking. 80% of our curriculum is focused on the future as opposed to the past. If you think about most academics, you're thinking about the past, right? How did this model evolve? How did this equation develop? If we're teaching leaders, they need to be practiced in what might happen in the future. What are the implications of a $100 genome? What happens when 3D printing reaches this type of resolution and that price point, et cetera? And we think very big in an entrepreneurial and collaborative way. Essentially, what we're doing is we're creating a crucible. And into that crucible, we're putting the top thinkers in the world and the fastest moving technologies, adding to that the most ambitious and accomplished young leaders in the world and existing leadership, and pointing people at the biggest opportunities and problems. And something interesting will happen as we swirl that around. We're starting to get some worldwide recognition. That's my White House uniform. This is more my Silicon Valley kind of outfit here. And the World Expo that was in Shanghai a couple of years ago will be in Milan in 3 years. And we're driving a lot of the technology thinking for the World Expo. In fact, I was there 48 hours ago, so hence my mouth is full of pasta taste. So that's a little bit about Singularity University. Let me take you through some of the major technologies and some of the breakthroughs that we're seeing to give you a sense of what our world looks like. So what's happening is we're essentially taking domain after domain in our world and turning it into information. Right? If you think about each of you, your memories are not in your heads anymore, they're in these devices. Right? Facebook has taken our relationships and turned them digital. Our communications is digital. You couldn't hear me in the back if it wasn't for the digitization of the technology of the communication of my voice. And so we're doing this in domain after domain, all powered and all doubling at this very extraordinary acceleration. So to give you an example, from the beginning of time to 2003, we as a humanity created 5 exabytes of digital information. 5 exabytes is a big number, big disk drive. So that was what happened from 0 to 2003. In 2010, we did that in 2 days. Okay? And by next year, we'll be doing that in 10 minutes. 5 exabytes of information created every 10 minutes. Today we're creating 60 hours of YouTube content every minute, uploaded. Okay? So we are literally taking every molecule, every cell, all the sensors in your phones, all acting as sensors and collecting information, digitizing it, and creating extraordinary. That's a picture of all the sensors in one of your phones. So what we've done is with the internet, we've created a nervous system for the world. And with mobile phones as the edge point, and sensors and sensory mechanisms, we're essentially taking all of that and harnessing all of that informational capability with the extraordinary computing power that we now have. Today, we have about 2 billion connected devices in the world. I've seen estimates by 2025 we'll have about 50 billion, and I've seen estimates by about 2040 or 2050 that we'll have 1 trillion internet-connected devices. So we're literally just at the very beginnings of this rather interesting inflection point in humanity. And we're turning into digital beings, right? For anybody under 30, what their Facebook profile looks like is much more important than how they're dressed. We've simply just never seen this before. And there are companies taking extraordinary and creating extraordinary value out of this. Google has created a $200 billion company by essentially managing and manipulating text and now video. Facebook, $100 billion company by digitizing relationships. Groupon and Foursquare are taking on the Yellow Pages marketplace. Well, thank God, somebody's doing it. And turning that into a digital information. And as we get into the quantified self, health data, sensor networks, et cetera, the unbelievable amount of information is set to explode. And I expect to see the first $1 trillion company coming out of there somewhere if Apple doesn't get to it first. Right? So I mentioned 3D printing. The key inflection point that we teach our students here is historically, when you're doing manufacturing, the more complex the object, the more it costs to make. Right? You had a more complex molding or more complex design, et cetera. Because of this technology, for the first time ever, complexity is free. If I can imagine it in my head, the printer doesn't care, it just spits it out. So you get some extraordinary jewelry. That's a prosthetic leg. Somebody plays competitive soccer using a prosthetic 3D printed leg because they can mold it perfectly. Right? That's a 3D printed motorcycle because you can fabricate it fully formed gears and ball joints with no assembly required. The top right is our class ring from last year. It's 3D printed. You decide the size, you send it off. They fabricate it in metal, they send it to you. So this is an interesting point. As an implication of this, note that the entire Chinese economy is based on assembling cheap plastic parts. What happens to their economy in a few years when everybody has a 3D printer at home and can fabricate toys, et cetera? Right? And by the way, that's not a good answer because it'll start calling in their debt. Right? So there's a downside to that. Okay? This is Watson. How many of you saw Watson beating the champions in Jeopardy? Can I see your show of hands? Okay. So for those of you who haven't, I encourage you to go to YouTube and watch this clip. When you hear the computer say, Alex, I'll take the category Chicks Dig Me for 400, it's kind of an interesting paradigm shift, right? Now, artificial intelligence is again, one of those things that we think has been kind of slow moving along, but actually we run the world with it. Credit card anti-fraud systems, anti-lock braking systems. Whenever we have a large amount of data, we use artificial intelligence to pattern mine, do data detection, et cetera, heuristics, and so on. And we are running the world on AI today. And you remember, if you went back 20 years, we used to say that there was no way a computer could ever beat a chess player, right? And then Deep Blue happened. And today, no human being can beat a chess player, a computerized chess player. And we used to think that there was no way a computer could play Jeopardy because of the use of puns and nuance, irony, humor, sometimes bad humor. And today, if you look at that score, the computer is not just beating Ken Jennings and the other Jeopardy, it's thrashing them. And what happens when you can take that capability and apply it to different areas? So this cost IBM like about $1 billion. It takes 90 supercomputers running to do this. But actually, that cost is dropping. What if you could apply that kind of analytic capability, to that nuanced understanding, to medicine or to education? By the way, for example, when you go to your doctor, 35% of the time you get misdiagnosed. So for the three of you sitting here, one of you the last time you went to the doctor had the wrong diagnosis. And if you add to that mistreatment, that adds up to 45%. That's not a great outcome, right? And the poor doctors are desperately trying to keep track of all of the symptoms, conditions, treatments, different medications, etc. And this is exactly where this type of capability can help. And we think we'll see a massive use of starting in healthcare using this type of technology very, very quickly. IBM's already supposed to, is starting to do that. How many of you have seen the Google car? Okay, a few of you, all right. So this uses, this is actually worth exploring. Let me go back a bit. Peter Diamandis is the founder of the X Prize Foundation. And X Prize offers large public prizes wherever there are market failures and so on. And he created a whole series of companies in the space industry in the 80s and 90s, and they're all stuck. They're all floundering because after the Cold War ended, we've just simply not had a lot of innovation in the space sector. And he was wondering what to do with this whole portfolio of companies, and he happened to read the biography of Charles Lindbergh. Now, Lindbergh won the Orteig Prize, which is $25,000, a public prize for crossing the Atlantic, about $3 million in today's money. And Peter, reading his biography, it was a great story that he won it unexpectedly. But 9 teams competing for the $25,000 spent $400,000 on R&D. And the collective resulting innovation created the commercial aviation industry and plane flight as we know today. And he thought, this guy put up a $25K purse, got a 15 times return on investment, and created a whole industry. So he got up one day and announced the SpaceX Prize, a $10 million prize for the first plane that would go suborbital within a couple of weeks of itself. And in 2004, Burt Rutan won that prize. The airplane used a mixture of laughing gas and tire rubber as its fuel. Right? So completely off-the-wall craziness. Richard Branson licensed it. Elon Musk has just launched a commercial space company, and we're starting to see the beginnings of the commercial space sector. He just finished an automotive X Prize for the first car that would do 100 miles a gallon with no emissions, and 156 teams competed around the world for that. So you see the peripheral innovation that comes from these contests. After the Gulf War, the US military commissioned a whole set of projects to try and create an autonomous vehicle to de-risk the supply chains, which were very exposed in Iraq. They spent about $500 million in 10 years and got a car that did about 8 miles an hour and crashed 40% of the time, which is not really a great outcome. They then said, well, let's turn it over to DARPA, and DARPA created the DARPA Challenge for the first car that would do a 150-mile track through the desert at an average of 30 miles an hour. The first year, all the cars crashed. Nobody made it even halfway through the course. The second year, 5 cars finished, 3 cars met the criteria successfully. Google hired the whole team, and they've been building the Google car. So this is the Google video, and if I could have sound for this one, this is what it's like to get into this car.
It's driving itself.
Oh, you get the general idea. If you look at this Prius, it's really tilted over. Poor Prius is not designed to be driven like this. And at the top of it, you've got LiDAR and radar detectors, et cetera. And it creates, using the LiDAR, a 3-dimensional image of its surroundings. Now, what's interesting about this car is this car has already done 300,000 miles on California highways and streets without an accident. Okay, already. In fact, it's had one accident when one of the engineers tried to park it and made a mistake. but driverless. Now, think of the implication of that. Now, the reality is human beings are terrible control systems for a 2-ton car going at high speed. A good statistic, last year, about a year ago, there was a 3-day period when BlackBerry lost its data services around the world. So there were no text or email messages. During that 3-day period, the accident rate in Abu Dhabi dropped by 40%. We are terribly distractible things. But that car with a whole host of sensors never falls asleep. Now, when we've done the estimates around this, so Google's built this car, it's fully functional. A month ago, Nevada passed a law authorizing autonomous vehicles. So within the next 10 to 15 years, now you're starting to see the beginnings of this car, Priuses that hold, stay in the lane, Mercedes that park themselves and so on, that'll start accelerating, right? Because frankly, we spend a huge amount of time sitting in cars uselessly, and you don't need artificial human intelligence to drive a car, you need artificial horse intelligence, right? So it doesn't take that much intelligence to navigate it. And the car goes through toll booths, it merges on highways, it'll avoid pedestrians, if it gets confused, it'll just stop, etc. And so it's actually they've done an incredible job in managing and navigating the various systems in the car. We've estimated that when you fully roll this paradigm out, that it will increase the capacity of existing roads, existing infrastructure, 15 times. Because you don't need parking lots. You don't have to worry about traffic jams because the cars will figure out themselves where they go. In LA, 60% of the land is devoted to the car. And all of that can be reclaimed for proper usage. So if I need a car, I just dial it on my cell phone, and one comes and picks me up at the right size, talking about sustainability, the right size. Today we buy the car that fits the worst case need, right? The once a month when we take our whole family up to the mountains. But 80% of the time, and note that 93% of the time, your car is sitting empty. So we'll turn that paradigm completely on its head using technology. But the downside is people actually don't like to be killed by robotic cars. They don't mind being killed by humans, but a robot, that would cause a problem. And so we'll have some issues on the regulatory side around this. But just as an example, that's one little example. Let me move on to a couple of others. Biotech. You know, if you look on the left there, that's the stack of the physical computing, the computing paradigm and the computing stack. Physical, then we have logical gateways, modules, computers, and then networks. It turns out that on the biological side, our human beings operate on a similar basis. We have proteins and genes that combine to create biochemical reactions that create pathways, cells, tissues, cultures into each of our cells is essentially a computer. Each of our neurons is a computer in its own right. We've seen the cost. If you think about language, language is reading, writing, comprehension. We've seen the cost of gene sequencing drop very dramatically over the last 10 years to more than an exponential rate. So it cost $1 billion to sequence the first genome 12 years ago. It cost about $400 million for the second one, $50 million for the third, about $14 million for the fourth. Does anybody know what it is today? It's $2,000. And in about 3 to 4 years, it'll be $100. And this is set to completely revolutionize medicine. Because as we understand exactly what's happening inside our bodies down at that level, our genes are essentially software code for what each cell should do. As we start understanding that, that starts becoming interesting. So over the last 10 years, we figured out the reading part of this language, the language of life. In China, the Beijing Genomics Institute is sequencing every species that they can find. They're sequencing millions of species so that they can combine them and do different things with them. And this starts getting slightly scary because now you can start manipulating life into kind of different ways, right? That's on the reading side. Now let's look at the writing side. 2 years ago, this story came out in the New York Times. I think it was probably the most underreported story I've ever seen, not to exaggerate or anything. We have, for the first time in the history of our world, a self-replicating life form, and its parent DNA is an email file. So what Craig Venter did was that he synthesized, a genome is made up of A, T, C, and G, 4 different molecules. So he synthesized a DNA sequence of a small bacteria, injected it in, and now the bacteria is replicating using a different DNA structure. And so this ability, we've hit an inflection point where we are now able to manipulate and fabricate life like we manipulate and fabricate software. And the implications of that are rather profound. I have a 6-month-old baby. Now, I grew up programming PCs. The kids today are programming the internet. He will be hacking the family dog. And that scares the bejesus out of me. right? How will we deal with that as a society? This is a photograph from the iGEM competition. At MIT every year, they bring together teams of students who hack DNA to see what can they do with it. Right? This is a glowing cat. So they've taken phosphorants, injected it, combined that with the DNA of a normal cat, and the cat glows in the dark. Now this is kind of a game, but there's an interesting use of this. If you inject this into trees and plant them by the side of the roads, they'll glow in the dark. You don't need streetlights. Right? So some practical uses coming out. And this is very much alive and in full production. There's a lot of people working on this. Biofuels. Craig Venter, having done the sequencing of this, is now synthesizing bacteria that can create algae that will create biofuels. So an acre of corn to produce ethanol will produce about 16 gallons of ethanol out per acre. It's a terrible policy disaster in this country. I'm Canadian, by the way, so I can kind of say those things. An acre of algae will produce about 10,000 gallons of biofuels. Where should the investment go? Right? So that's a more constructive use. This is hacking a cat. This fellow here created a whole biotech lab in his garage and is working away doing things. There's a team working on recreating the woolly mammoth. Essentially, from this point onwards, we do not have to worry about species going extinct because we have the DNA, we can replicate it. And we're fully into Steven Spielberg territory. Right? And by the way, all of these technologies have extraordinarily negative consequences as well as the positive. Right? And one of the key things we think about is stressing to our students the positive and ethical uses and constructive uses of these technologies. But one of the big concerns is bioterrorism. Because how do you control somebody that can just, with a little bit of money, put together a biotech lab? Moving on to neuroscience, the image on the right is our old world view of the brain, this lump of jelly, which we didn't really understand. On the left is some recent imaging that's come out of how we're understanding the pathways of brains and what our neurons do at a functional level. And we're starting to get extraordinarily good at this. Now, we still don't understand how the brain works. I mentioned the example earlier. We still don't understand why we sleep. If you ask the leading neuroscientists why do we sleep, they basically say we have no idea. And although we don't understand the brain very well, it doesn't stop us from interfacing with it. On the right is an image of Bernoulli's principle, which governs aircraft lift. Right? We actually fundamentally don't fully know how Bernoulli's principle works, but it hasn't stopped us from engineering the hell out of it to get very reliable plane flight. And we think neuroscience is headed in the same way. What happens when I can take cloud computing, AI, big data, storage loops, gaming mechanics, sensors, optical technologies, and all address the image of a brain and what's happening inside our brain? We have one of our researchers today has a lab where he does real-time fMRI. So you lie down in this fMRI machine, he tells you to think about lifting your right arm, and he can see which neurons are firing, specifically which neurons are firing. And so that starts becoming very interesting for therapeutic techniques for Alzheimer's, other types of mental diseases. We're seeing, I've seen Wi-Fi chips embedded in patients where they can manage and control a wheelchair. And you may have seen the news, Stephen Hawking has just been fitted with what's called an iBrain, which can read his thoughts and then speak out what he's thinking. And that's actually from one of our lecturers. So things are starting to move very quickly. Again, there's a negative side. And this is where, this is a field called optogenetics. There's an intersection of genetics, virology, and optics. And what they've done here is they've engineered a new type of neuron that happens to be very light sensitive. So most neurons take input from about 10,000 other neurons, decide whether to fire or not, and then they output that to another 10,000 neurons. Here, they've engineered it so that if you shine a light on the neuron will fire. They've then used a virus to distribute the neuron in the localized part of the brain, in this case, the part of the brain where compassion sits. This was actually funded by the Dalai Lama. So you put that in the brain of the mouse where the compassion sits. They put an optical fiber into the brain of the mouse, turned on a switch, light goes into the brain, the neurons fire, and the mouse becomes uber compassionate. And this is in mice, so that means it's not very far from where we are. Right? So this is now full kind of thought control, mind control. over the internet, essentially. By the way, we have an old word for this. This is called marketing. The ability to generate the response that you want given a stimulus, etc. Right? What we're doing with all of these technologies is accelerating to an unbelievable degree the pace of development. I mentioned synthetic biology. Our old word for that was breeding. And for hundreds and thousands of years, we've taken different animals, plants, bred them together, and selected for the traits that we want. We have today that capability. And by the way, we're actually feeding the planet because of genetically modified foods. We've served over 1 trillion meals containing GMOs around the world. And that's actually how we're able to feed the planet today. Otherwise, we'd have a lot more devastating hunger around the world. Europe is causing a massive issue because they've kind of put out the brakes on without understanding why. And they're causing huge damage to Africa because they're not able to use the same types of crops that they should. So some pretty big issues. This came out a few weeks ago. These guys found out that if you take a 2-amp current and put it next to your brain for 30 minutes, your learning retention doubles. I don't recommend you try this at home. Do not give it to your kids who are trying to study for an exam. We simply don't understand the long-term effects of this, and it's probably frying parts of their brain without them realizing, right? And this actually brings up kind of an interesting problem, and I'll come back to that later. But there's some we're starting to hack at all these different parts of the brain. This is, I don't know if you can see the image. This is actually the image in the shadow on the right. You can see somebody in the screen, and on the left there's another shadow. That's me with a brain. That's the image of my brain. And this fellow has discovered certain sounds that when you play the sounds, my brain is able to go into a focused alpha state, which is great for studying and doing work if I'm cranking out emails or working on a PowerPoint if I'm a student. And so this fellow, just on his own, has found these various sounds that can put you into a very focused state, right, on his own. So this is now innovation. Technology is so democratized that somebody just sitting at home with a sensor and a laptop and can create what could be a kind of a game-changing outcome if we could make sure, if I needed to focus at any given point, I could do that on demand. Pretty interesting, pretty useful. This is solar energy. Now the good news here, we tend to be kind of worried about technology sometimes, is solar energy is one of those things that's actually doing really well. Solar energy has hit that exponential curve, and it's doubling in its price performance every 22 months today. So today it's 0.12% of world energy supply. 2 years ago it was 0.06. In 2 years it'll be 0.25%. 2 years after that it'll be 0.5%. 2 years after that it'll be 1%. And then we're 7 doublings away, or about 16 to 20 years from 100% coverage. Because if you add up all of the energy and all of the fossil fuels in the entire world, it adds up to about 5 days of sunlight hitting the world. And that shifts the conversation instantly from a scarcity problem to a conversion problem. Right? And once you have decent energy, then desalinization, all sorts of other things become a lot more manageable. So on the energy side, we think in 2 to 3 decades, we will actually have abundant energy. We do not have an energy crisis coming along. And we've noticed, importantly, that once any technology hits that information enablement curve, it stays on that path. So we've seen in the 90s, in this last decade, computers and mobile phones powering where we're going. This current decade is the internet and social network. The next decade is all about biotech. What we're able to do by manipulating genes and understanding that world is going to transform healthcare and life itself. Then AI and robotics. Robots today are like computers in the 60s. They're big and clunky, and we don't quite know what we do with them. Maybe a bit of vacuuming here and there. Right? By the way, how many of you own a Roomba? Okay. So an interesting, weird factoid. 60% of Roomba owners, Roomba is a little vacuum cleaning robot. 60% of Roomba owners name their robots, and 30% take them on holiday. How weird. So we're going to start anthropomorphizing these things pretty interestingly. Okay? Now I want to get to the implications of this, because this has some very profound implications. This is mainstream media. Mainstream media is set to be kind of wiped out over the next few years, because it used to be, that's a graph of amount of coverage versus time from the news event. So a plane lands in the Hudson, you have a discovery of a news event, then it hits mainstream media coverage, then you have post-analysis, post-event analysis, politicizing, blame calling, etc., right? And it started off with blogs and social media that would come in from the right-hand side and start commenting about the news. But with Twitter and Flickr and so on, discovery is not happening via mainstream news. Discovery is happening by everybody with a cell phone. And so mainstream news getting squeezed in the middle, at the same time their business models being wiped out. Just in 2004, Craigslist took out $65 million of advertising just in San Francisco in that 1 year. So it's actually deflating the entire industry and taking huge amounts of money out of it. This is the guy who was tweeting by accident the capture of Osama bin Laden. Talk about discovery. If you're the CIA, you're not very happy about this. You're trying to run a totally covert, top secret operation, and this guy's tweeting it out to the whole world. Right? So how do we manage that as we go forward? And it used to be that you would own your users in the same way that your mobile phone company owns you. Increasingly, businesses start buying their users, advertising, Google AdWords, et cetera. And more we're starting to have to earn users. And on the internet today, the way it works is you give away a huge amount of value for free, like Google or eBay does, and then you tax a very small piece of it. And that's seemingly more and more where things are going. Chris Anderson wrote a book a few years ago called Going to Free, and he makes a very compelling argument that every single business model goes to free. And so this has interesting consequences for the future of the economy, where the future of business goes. We're increasingly also seeing virtual currencies. I proudly got up a year ago and predicted the first virtual currency and digital currency would show up in a few years, and 2 weeks later, Bitcoin launched. And being a forecaster is a dangerous game. And this has huge consequences, and I want to bring it back to the local level for this. This is the Bill of Rights. That Fourth Amendment is the right to privacy. And it's defined as information of yours that is in the home, quote unquote. And the courts have decreed that if you use Gmail or any web-based information or the cloud, your information is not in the home. So you do not have constitutional protection if you use the internet of any of your information, which is why the government can view it with impunity. So this is a major fundamental pillar of society that's disappearing without any public discourse. And how does any regulatory, one of the questions we have is how does a regulatory framework of any kind keep pace as technology is accelerating away from us? This is, I mentioned our curriculum planning meeting. Although we have the best lecturers in the world coming to speak, we cannot become an accredited official educational organization, because to do that, you have to fix your curriculum and not change it. And by default, we have to change our curriculum on an ongoing basis. Now, we're clearly an edge case, but this is starting to happen more and more in society. This is the patent system, fundamentally broken. By the way, this is a patent for making toast. This guy tried to grant, and this application for making toast, watch the orange spot up the top, was granted in 2000. How do we manage that? Because there's so much innovation happening. The poor patent examiner has never had toast. I don't know. Her name is there if we look at it, right? So our patent system, intellectual property system, fundamentally broken. Privacy washing away in front of our eyes. So we have a structural issue in society we've never seen before, the world moving so quickly that our regulatory frameworks can't keep up. And how do they keep up as technology is accelerating away from it? I mentioned this article because if you tried to submit that to the FDA, it would take 10 years through clinical trials, et cetera, et cetera. That device would be long extinct by the time you submit that. So today, by the time the FDA regulates a drug and makes sure it's safe, the drug is out of date. So this is a fundamental issue. This is life extension, and with all of these technologies, 3D printing of organs, genetic manipulation, we think that within the next few decades, we will have immortality, infinite life extension. And now we believe now it's not a question of if, but when. And what happens to society where for the first time ever, we can live for a very, very long time. And it will happen within our lifetimes. So we're at a point in humanity where how we manage the next couple of decades will dictate how the next few centuries of humanity goes. And that we're at one of those historical inflection points that we see every few hundred years. This is hitting the news in a fairly big way. There's an Economist article about 3D printing a violin. There's the Watson. There's the story about immortality in the Time magazine last year. Fundamentally, we used to live in a world that was local and linear. Anything that happened within a day's walk of us. Today, the world is global and exponential. And I'm interested in the local environment. I speak to a lot of credit unions. I speak to a lot of community foundations because I think this is a fundamentally important paradigm. So I did a little SWOT analysis. I used to be a consultant, so you have to have the 2x2 diagram, et cetera, right? So here's a couple of weaknesses that I see. I think the economy is a huge weakness. Employment around the world is a massive weakness. Huge threats from globalization. And I put the government as a threat because they're so paralyzed, the inaction is costing a huge amount. But some massive opportunities, the democratization of technology, ability to take risk by small teams, and entrepreneurship. And strengths down at the local level, I wanted to highlight. A key one is community and trust. If you think about every internet service, every website in the world is desperately trying to buy, beg, borrow, steal community and trust. And what you have in this room and what you have in the local level and what you have in these regions around the world is community and trust. And there's something magical that's happening that is here at this local level, and you need to figure out ways of capturing it. So how to capture it? I gave this short talk at TED last year showing that democracy has a bit of a problem. You can't do long-term planning in a democracy where everybody's focused on short-term, high-metabolism election cycles. China may be very authoritarian, but at least it can look at 30 years and say, what do we need in education, healthcare, energy, and so on? I grew up in India, and my family was quite involved in the independence movement. And it's great that it's a democracy, but in 60 years, no infrastructure has been laid down. What I'm thrilled to hear in the talk that Ray gave is that as a local community, you're implementing infrastructure. And that's hugely encouraging, and I think that's a very, very important trend. So I have two ideas. One is Tech Shop, if you're familiar with that, is the local ability to go and make anything. They have like an exercise gym membership model where you pay $100 a month and you can go make anything. You can use 3D printers, design software, et cetera. This paradigm is set to take over the world, and I think you can implement and partner with these folks, implement it locally, and spur a whole new generation of entrepreneurship. Some of you may be familiar with Square. Who's familiar with Square? It's the ability to take credit card transactions locally. It was created by the inventor of Twitter. Square is a billion-dollar company, created a tech shop as a hobby. Right? So at that local level, you can spur and unleash the creativity of every one of your students, citizens, members of your community. You have that opportunity. Right? And I mentioned XPRIZE, and I want to finish on this note. We had an interesting issue. We had 4,000 applicants this summer for our 80 slots. Our application rate growing up exponentially. My organization not growing exponentially. So that has to be managed somehow. So I took inspiration from Peter and the XPRIZE, and we partnered with a Brazilian university. We said, we'll guarantee you one of the 80 slots. Let's run a contest in Sao Paulo. And the challenge was, in order to come to SU for the summer, study with the top 3 thought leaders, work on projects to impact 1 billion people, come up with an idea that would impact 1 million people, and start implementing it. After a couple of months, 230 projects were kicked off. Completely blew our minds. So I went to the board and said, my God, I want to go do that. If I could do that in Mexico City, Jakarta, Shanghai, Tokyo, Bombay. Last year, I ran a dozen of these contests around the world. Probably the highlight was in Israel. I went over there, did the photographs from that, did the judging of the contest. There were 80 projects created, each attempting to impact 1 million people. One of the judges then came to me and said, look, do you have a Palestinian contest? I said, well, no, we don't have the funding for that. And he said, I will fund it. So I made a couple of phone calls, went to the West Bank a couple of days later, gave a talk in Ramallah. By the way, the name Salim Ismail is really useful in Palestine. Not so easy to get back, but very easy to get there. And last summer, we had a Palestinian student funded by an Israeli industrialist. This year, I'm doing 23 contests around the world, which is why I'm traveling so crazily. I think you can use this model locally at a very efficient level to create and solve all sorts of local problems. If you create a little board of what problems you want to solve locally, allow people to focus on them, create a little contest, generate some prize money, it's a very, very efficient model. And as Peter says, the best way of predicting the future is to create it yourself. And I think your organizations, nonprofits, philanthropic organizations, have the ability at the local level to take risk, and I think will need to do so at an increasing level in terms of the government, the economy, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully I've rewired your brains in terms of how technology works. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for having me. I hope it's been interesting.
All right, thank you, Salim. You've definitely rewired my brain. I've got two teenagers, and the world that they're going to grow up in, the world that they're going to live into is going to be quite a world. And I know listening to Salim's talk several months ago really has shaped the way I think about the future. And I hope it will do the same for you, no matter what you do, whether you run a community foundation or a bank, or you're working for a local nonprofit organization. The reality is that the future that we are moving into is both frightening and filled with all kinds of potential. And it's an extraordinarily challenging future that we will all be living in. And I thank you, Salim, for helping us to see the future, I think, in a very, very different way. I want to bring us to a close by thanking all of the sponsors that make this possible, all of you table sponsors that sponsor a table year after year after year. We thank you for that. We'll keep doing this as long as you keep sponsoring. I want to particularly thank our two lead sponsors, First National Bank and Bruce and Muriel Hawk. And I've got a gift, Dale Cloud from First National, and Bruce and Muriel, if you'll come up. Salim's colleague wrote the book called Abundance, which I've read and is quite an interesting book. And I think it gives a very positive spin on the future and a very optimistic look at the potential of the future. So Dale, thank you, First National Bank, and Bruce and Muriel. Thank you very much. Mueller and Associates CPA, Palmer Flowers were also special sponsors this year at the spotlight level. We have numerous sponsors at the event sponsor level. Thank you all very much. You're the ones that make this happen. And then way too many table sponsors for us to name. But again, thank you all. Special thanks to just the folks listed there. I won't take the time to name them all. I do want to throw up one slide real quick of our Board of Trustees and thank all of them. Just stand up super quick so when the event ends, we'll know where you are. We want to thank Randy Davis and Tom Patterson for their service on the Board of Trustees. They're rotating off the board. Thank you so much for your service. Thank and welcome Doug Hutchison, Bob Corney, and Chuck Levine, who are new members of the Board of Trustees coming on in July. Thank you again for helping us celebrate philanthropy. What we celebrate says a great deal about who we are, and we thank you for helping us celebrate philanthropy once again this year.